Amara had always been close to her father, Chief Okoye, a man everyone in Ibadan respected. He was known for his farmland, his generosity, and the way he carried himself with quiet strength. To Amara, though, he was more than a farmer or a landowner. He was her best friend, her teacher, and the one person who never doubted her. When he fell ill, she was the one who stayed by his side. She cooked for him, washed his clothes, and sat beside his bed every night, praying he would get better. But the illness was short and cruel. Within weeks, Chief Okoye was gone. On the morning of his burial, Amara felt as though the ground had shifted under her feet. The compound was filled with mourners, people praising his name and speaking of his kindness, yet none of their words filled the emptiness in her chest. She tried to be strong, but when they lowered him into the earth, she broke down. Her heart refused to accept that her father, the man who taught her how to plant yam seedlings and read the weather by the sky, would never smile at her again. Amara expected comfort from her mother and her sibling. She thought they would gather around her, grieving together. But as soon as the ceremony ended, she noticed the change. Her brothers stood in corners, speaking in low voices. Her mother's eyes avoided hers. The whispers weren't about her father's memory. They were about his land, his wealth, and who would get what. Amara, still raw with grief, realized she was already being left out. The day of the will reading came faster than Amara expected. She had barely finished mourning her father when her family gathered in the sitting room of their old house. The air felt heavy, filled with both grief and greed. Amara sat quietly in the corner, her father's favorite scarf wrapped around her shoulders, as the lawyer opened the envelope. She hoped for a moment of fairness, something that would reflect the love her father had always shown her. But as the lawyer read out the details, her heart sank. Every piece of land, the family house, and even her father's savings were listed under her brother's name. Nothing was said about her. Amara blinked, thinking maybe she had misheard. She looked around, searching for someone to speak up, to question what was happening. But her older brother Chaik was already smiling in triumph, his chest puffed out as if he had won a prize. When Amara finally found the courage to ask, "What about me?" Chaik's voice cut through the room like a knife. "You're just a daughter," he said flatly. "You don't need property. Land belongs to men. You'll marry one day and move away." His words stung so deeply that she could hardly breathe. She turned to her mother, hoping at least for comfort, but her mother's face was cold, distant. "Your brothers will take care of you if you need anything," she said, her tone sharp and final. It was as if the years Amara spent caring for her father meant nothing. The room grew louder as her siblings argued over who would manage which farm, who would move into the house, and how the money should be split. Their voices were filled with excitement, their eyes shining with greed. No one noticed the tears rolling down Amara's cheeks. She felt invisible, as though her presence in the family had been erased with a single reading of the will. Amara thought about the nights she had stayed awake beside her father, the sacrifices she made to make him comfortable, the way he had held her hand and whispered that she was his pride. None of that mattered to them. They saw only land and money. When the lawyer closed his folder and left, Amara remained seated, too stunned to move. Her siblings walked past her, already planning their new lives, as though she wasn't even in the room. Chaik clapped one of his brothers on the back, laughing about which car they would buy first. Their joy was cruel, like salt in her wound. That evening, Amara sat alone in her father's room, breathing in the faint smell of his clothes. Her mother passed her in the hallway without a word. The betrayal was clear. She wasn't just left out of the will, she was abandoned by the very people she thought would stand beside her. For the first time, she realized she had no one but herself. And the pain of that truth was heavier than anything she had ever carried. It was late in the evening when Amara walked back to her father's house, the only place that still felt like home. The sky was heavy with rain, and the streets of Ibadan glistened with puddles from an earlier storm. She was tired, her heart weighed down by grief and the sting of betrayal. All she wanted was to slip into her father's old room, curl up on his bed, and hold on to whatever little memory she had left of him. But when she reached the gate, her heart froze. The padlock was new. She rattled it, confused, thinking maybe she had the wrong key. She tried again, harder this time, but the truth hit her fast. They had changed the locks. Panic rose in her chest as she pushed against the gate and called for someone. Instead of an answer, she saw a pile of her clothes and belongings dumped carelessly by the roadside, already soaked by the rain. Her dresses clung to the mud, her books ruined, and the small box of jewelry her father had once given her scattered like trash. For a moment, Amara couldn't move. Her hands shook as she picked up her things, her tears mixing with the rain. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself. But it was. Her family had thrown her out like she was nothing, as if she hadn't grown up in that house, as if she hadn't shared in their laughter and meals. She knocked on the gate, begged to be let in, but no one answered. Behind the walls, she could hear faint voices, laughter, the clinking of plates. They were inside, warm and dry, while she was left outside in the storm. Amara sat on the wet ground, hugging herself. The rain poured harder, drenching her hair and skin until she was shivering. She had nowhere to go, no friend she could call at that late hour. Slowly, she gathered what she could carry and found a dry corner under a small shop canopy down the road. She placed her father's old journal on her lap, shielding it with her body from the rain, as if it were the most precious thing she had left. That night, the city felt cruel. Cars passed by without stopping, and strangers glanced at her, but kept walking. She curled up against the cold concrete floor, her stomach empty, her heart broken. She thought of her father's voice, the way he used to tell her, "Amara, no matter what, you are strong." Those words echoed in her head, but at that moment, she didn't feel strong at all. She felt abandoned, humiliated, and lost. Yet as the night dragged on, something inside her shifted. She realized she had reached her lowest point. There was nothing left for her to lose. And in that painful truth, she found the faintest spark of freedom. Holding her father's journal close, Amara whispered to herself, "They took everything from me, but not this. Not him. Not what he left in me." It was in that cold, rainy night on the streets of Abadan that her turning point quietly began. The morning after that long, wet night, Amara sat on the roadside, clutching her father's journal. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her body ached from sleeping on the hard ground. She opened the journal, hoping to feel close to him, maybe to hear his voice again in his handwriting. The pages were filled with his neat notes, planting dates, crop experiments, and little sayings he often told her. She flipped through slowly until something caught her eye, a folded paper tucked deep between the pages. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a map. At first, she thought it was just one of her father's sketches of farmland, but then she saw her name written in his handwriting at the top. For Amara. Her heart skipped. She turned the pages again and found more notes. Details of a small piece of land he had secretly bought in her name years ago. The land wasn't near the family estate. It was a small plot outside the city. The words felt like a light breaking through the darkness. Even in death, her father had thought of her, prepared something for her, something no one could take away. Amara held the journal to her chest, and these were not just notes on paper. This was his gift, his way of making sure she wasn't forgotten. For the first time since his death, she felt a spark of hope. The land wasn't developed, and she had nothing. No money, no tools, no house, but she had a starting point. She decided right there she would honor his memory by bringing that land to life. With determination she didn't even know she still had, Amara found her way to the plot. The land was small, overgrown with weeds, but to her, it looked like treasure. She stood there barefoot, breathing in the air, imagining rows of vegetables, cassava, and maize. She could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "Land never betrays." She had no farming tools, not even a hoe, but a kind neighbor nearby noticed her sitting on the edge of the land, studying the soil. An elderly woman named Mama Tola came over and asked what she was doing. Amara told her everything, her voice shaking. Mama Tola looked at her with kindness and lent her a rusty hoe and a cutlass. "Start small, my daughter," she said. "The land will answer you if your heart is true." And so Amara began. Under the hot Abadan sun, she dug into the earth with blistered hands, clearing weeds and turning soil. She planted vegetables and cassava, even though she knew it would take time before they grew. Each seed she placed in the ground felt like planting a piece of herself, her pain, and her hope. At night, she slept in a small shack she built with scraps of wood, holding her father's journal close. She had nothing else, but on that patch of soil she felt rich. The land was her inheritance, her hidden gift, and she was determined to make it her future. Amara's new life was far from easy. She built herself a small shack with old wood and zinc sheets, just enough to keep out the rain at night. The floor was bare earth, and when it rained, water sometimes leaked inside. Still, it was her home. Every morning she woke before sunrise, tied a scarf around her head, and walked out to the little piece of land her father had left her. With borrowed tools and blistered hands, she planted and weeded, determined to make the soil come alive. Her family heard about what she was doing, and instead of support, they mocked her. Chike laughed the loudest. "Look at her," he told the others. "She thinks she can farm alone. A woman with no money, no husband, and no strength." Their words cut deep, but Amara refused to answer them. She knew if she let their voices into her heart, she would give up. Instead, she turned back to her father's journal, reading the line he had written many times, "Land never betrays." But the land tested her. Some nights, thieves crept in and stole the little vegetables she had managed to grow. She would wake up to find her crops gone, her hard work snatched away. Another time, a heavy storm swept through Abadan. The rain fell without mercy, flattening her cassava plants and washing away the seedlings she had planted with so much hope. Amara stood in the mud afterward, crying as she tried to replant what she could. It felt like the world was against her. Food was scarce. Many nights, she went to bed hungry, drinking only water to quiet her stomach. Sometimes she thought of running away, leaving everything behind. But then she would hold her father's journal close, whispering his words to herself until she found strength again. Despite the hardship, she refused to quit. Day after day, Amara worked the land. She learned from her mistakes, how to dig drainage trenches to protect against floods, how to store her harvest safely, and how to hide some of her vegetables from thieves. Slowly, she grew tougher, her hands hardened, her body stronger. She began to understand the soil in a way that felt almost spiritual, as if her father's spirit guided her with every seed she planted. Neighbors watched her with surprise. They had expected her to fail, to give up after the first setback. Instead, they saw her sweating under the sun, her back bent but her spirit unbroken. She didn't just plant crops, she planted her grief, her betrayal, and her hope in that soil. Every time she felt like giving in, she remembered the words, "Land never betrays." And even though the land tested her with storms, thieves, and hunger, she believed one day it would reward her. Holding on to that faith, Amara worked through the pain, knowing that each sunrise brought her one step closer to a future her family never imagined she could build. Amara's days slowly began to change. What once felt like endless struggle started showing small signs of hope. The vegetables she planted finally began to grow strong and healthy. Cassava stems pushed up from the earth, green and alive, and rows of peppers and okra stood proudly under the sun. For the first time in months, Amara saw the result of her hard work, and it gave her strength to keep going. Her persistence didn't go unnoticed. The women in the nearby village watched her closely. At first, they whispered among themselves, wondering how long she could last. But when they saw she never gave up, through hunger, through storms, through ridicule, they grew curious. One day, Mama Tola, the kind neighbor who had first lent her tools, brought two younger women along to help Amara weed the farm. "This girl is not lazy," Mama Tola said. "She works like 10 men. If she can stand alone, then together we can stand stronger." Soon more women joined in. Some brought small baskets of seedling, others shared their knowledge about the soil, and a few simply came to give their hand. Working side by side, they laughed, sang songs, and supported one another. The land that once felt like Amara's lonely battlefield now echoed with voices of sisterhood. With the extra help, Amara harvested more than before. Instead of losing everything to thieves or storms, she now had enough to take to the local market. The women decided to pool their harvests together, forming a small cooperative. They set up a stall, arranging piles of fresh vegetables, cassava, and peppers. Customers began to notice the quality of their produce, clean, fresh, and fairly priced. Word spread quickly in the community. Soon, market women, restaurant owners, and even street food vendors started coming to buy from them. For Amara, it was a new world. She held her first real earnings in her hands, small bundles of naira notes, damp from sweat and soil, but to her, they felt like gold. She didn't waste the money. Every profit, no matter how little, she put back into the farm. She bought better seeds, stronger tools, and even started saving for fertilizer. Her shack remained humble, but her land began to grow rich. The same people who once laughed at her now came to watch, their mockery replaced by quiet admiration. Her brothers heard about her success, but instead of congratulating her, they scoffed. "It's just a small garden," Chike sneered. But deep down, even he knew it was becoming more than that. Amara didn't care about their opinions anymore. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a spark of joy. Her farm was no longer just survival, it was becoming a future. And as she worked side by side with the women who believed in her, she realized something powerful. She was no longer alone. What started as one girl's fight to survive was turning into a movement of women determined to rise together. 3 years passed, and the little patch of land that once looked like nothing had transformed into something people across Abadan could no longer ignore. Amara's farm stretched wide now, neat rows of vegetables, cassava, maize, and fruits covering the soil her father had once mapped out for her. What had started with a rusty hoe and borrowed seeds was now a thriving business with workers, machines, and steady customers. Restaurants began calling her directly, eager for her fresh produce. Market traders came in trucks to buy in bulk. Soon, her name spread beyond Abadan. Buyers from Lagos placed orders, and before long, some of her products were packaged and sent abroad. For Amara, it felt like living in a dream, but she knew it was all built on sleepless nights, endless work, and her father's words. Land never betrays. With her growing income, Amara built a modern farmhouse on the land. It wasn't just for herself, it became the heart of her business. The farmhouse had offices for record keeping, a storage unit for crops, and even a training space where she began teaching other women how to farm smarter. She employed over 50 workers, many of them widows and young women who had once struggled just like her. Each paycheck she gave out filled her with pride. She remembered the nights she had gone hungry and promised herself her workers would never feel abandoned the way she once had. The cooperative of women who had stood by her in the early days became her closest ally. Together, they grew stronger, expanding the farm's reach. What started as a survival story was now an empire, and the world was beginning to notice. Journalists came with cameras and notebooks, interviewing Amara under the shade of her farmhouse veranda. They marveled at how a young woman, once thrown out with nothing, had built something so big with her bare hand. Newspapers carried headlines, "The Homeless Daughter Who Built an Empire." Television stations aired features about her, showing shots of her fields, her workers, and the cooperative of women smiling as they harvested together. Amara's story spread like wildfire on radio and social media, inspiring countless people across Nigeria and beyond. Messages poured in from strangers who said her journey gave them hope to keep going. Through it all, Amara remained humble. She still walked the rows of her farm every morning, inspecting the crops herself, greeting her workers by name. She knew success was fragile, and she never wanted to forget where she had started, from that rainy night when she had nothing but her father's journal to hold on to. Now, when she looked at her land, she didn't just see crops. She saw her father's love, her pain turned into strength, and the proof that even when the world tries to break you, you can rise higher than anyone expects. Amara was no longer just a farmer's daughter. She had become a force, a symbol, and a builder of dreams. While Amara's farm grew stronger with each season, her siblings' lives went in the opposite direction. The vast inheritance they had fought for, the big house, the farmland, the saving, was slowly being eaten away by carelessness and greed. Chaik, proud and arrogant, spent money like water. He bought flashy cars, hosted loud parties, and surrounded himself with friends who disappeared as soon as the money thinned out. The farmland he inherited was left idle, overrun with weeds, while the house became a place of quarrels and neglect. Her other brothers and sisters were no better. They argued constantly about money, each one accusing the other of taking more than their share. No one managed the land properly. No one invested wisely. The family's wealth, built over decades by Chief Okoye's hard work, was slipping through their fingers. Soon, debts began to pile up. Lenders came knocking at their gates, demanding payment. What once was the pride of Abadan, a household known for abundance and respect, was now spoken of with pity. People whispered, "The Okoye family is finished." Meanwhile, Amara's name was on everyone's lips. Her farm was feeding families, supplying businesses, and creating jobs. When people compared her success to her siblings' downfall, it made their shame even deeper. Chaik, who once boasted that a daughter could never hold land, now struggled to keep food on his own table. Eventually, desperation pushed them to do what they had once sworn they never would. One evening, as the sun was setting over her fields, Amara saw them walking up the dirt road toward her farmhouse. Chaik led the way, but his shoulders were no longer straight with pride. His clothes looked worn, his face older, lined with stress. Behind him came her other brothers and sisters, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and need. Even their mother, once cold to Amara, shuffled quietly beside them, avoiding her eyes. They sat in her office, the same office where she now planned shipments and signed contracts. Chaik cleared his throat, trying to sound confident, but his voice cracked. "Amara, we need your help. The debts are too much. The land is wasted. The house is falling apart. Please, sister, you have to save the family." Amara sat quietly, her hands folded on the table. She looked at them one by one and saw the same people who had thrown her out into the rain, who had laughed at her when she bent over her little plot of land. The memory of that night came back with full force. The cold, the hunger, the humiliation. For a moment, her heart tightened, but she said nothing. Her siblings waited, restless, their pride swallowed by need. The silence between them felt heavier than any words. Amara knew this was the moment the tables had turned. They had left her with nothing, and now they were the ones with empty hands. The family gathering was held in the old compound, though it no longer looked like the proud home it once was. The paint was peeling, the roof leaked in places, and the yard that used to host visitors with pride was overrun with. Amara stepped through the gate, her calm presence turning heads. She wasn't dressed in flashy clothes or jewelry, but there was something about her confidence, the way she carried herself, that made her siblings shift uncomfortably in their seats. Chaik stood up to greet her, forcing a smile. The same man who once locked her out now tried to act like a peacemaker. "Amara, we're glad you came," he said, his voice a little too sweet. Around him, her other brothers and sisters nodded, pretending to be warm, though she could see the desperation in their eyes. The air was thick with unspoken tension. After some small talk, the true purpose of the meeting came out. Chaik cleared his throat and said, "Sister, we know you've done well. Everyone knows about your farm, your success, your story. But we are still your family. We are struggling, and the debts, they are drowning us. We need you to help us. We need money." The others chimed in, their voices soft and pleading. Even their mother finally spoke, her tone heavy with regret. "Amara, you are blessed. Please, don't let your family be destroyed. Help your brothers." Amara sat quietly, her eyes steady on them. She thought about the night she had come home to find her clothes dumped in the rain. She remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the mockery she had endured while she bent over the soil with blistered hands. They had left her to suffer, certain she would not survive. Now they were looking at her as if she were their savior. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You left me with nothing," she said slowly, each word landing like a stone. "But from nothing I built everything." The room fell silent. No one moved, no one dared to interrupt. Her words cut deeper than any rejection of money ever could. Chike's face flushed, and her mother looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The silence was thick, filled with the weight of their guilt. Amara rose to her feet, smoothing her dress with quiet dignity. She didn't shout, she didn't gloat, and she didn't explain further. She didn't need to. They all understood the message. She owed them nothing. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the compound, her steps steady and sure. Behind her, the family sat frozen, staring at the doorway she had just passed through. For the first time, they realized the power she held wasn't in her money or her farm. It was in her strength, her dignity, and her refusal to bow to them again. And that silence she left behind stung more than any rejection of their request ever could. Amara's farm was no longer just a business. With her success, she began to dream bigger, not just for herself, but for others who had known the kind of pain she once carried. She used part of her earnings to start a foundation for orphaned and abandoned children. She built small homes on her land where they could live, eat, and go to school. She gave them the love and safety she had once been denied. To her, these children were not charity cases. They were seeds, and like her crops, all they needed was care to grow strong. Soon, people began to invite Amara to speak at events, to share how she had turned heartbreak into hope. Standing before crowds, she spoke in her calm, steady way, never with bitterness but always with truth. "When my family left me homeless," she would say, "I found a home in my father's love and his lessons." Her words moved people because they came from lived experience, not from books or speeches. The line that stayed with everyone who heard her was simple yet powerful. "They took everything and left me with nothing, yet in that nothing, I found everything." It became more than her story. It became a message for anyone who felt abandoned or broken. Amara's name spread far beyond Abaddon. But to her, the greatest legacy wasn't the wealth, the fame, or even the empire she built. It was the lives she touched, the women she employed, the children she sheltered, and the countless people who found strength in her journey. What began as pain had bloomed into purpose, and through it all, she kept her father's words alive. Land never betrays.